Welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. I'm Rob Howard, and today we're going to talk about intercultural competence. Today, what we're going to talk about, talk a little bit about some of the diversities amongst business English and intercultural competence. I'm going to talk about some of the major issues that are involved, and I'm going to give you some examples just to show you where some of the problems take place. Now, first, a little story. I first got involved with intercultural competence back when I was in business in the United States. And even before that, I noticed growing up in Boston, which is basically an Irish, Italian, Catholic, Jewish, middle class small town. I moved to Rhode Island, which is only about an hour away. And this switched to a primarily Italian Catholic area. And what I noticed is there was a different way in the vocabulary that people used, the way that they talked, the way that they responded. And this immediately hit me when I started working after university in both areas, that I had to have the ability to switch between my Boston voice and my Rhode Island voice. Later on in business, as I moved around the country, I really noticed this most of all when I moved to Tennessee, where going out to a southern area, people were totally different. Everything was different between them. And this showed me when I was dealing with people that I had to change my voicing. I had to be aware of what their reality was for their culture, vocabulary, grammar, and the accent and pronunciation. So the picture here, you see a lot of different pencils, and this sort of tells the story of what we're looking at in the world today. We have people all over the world. This is a global economy that we're dealing with right now. And with globalization, we're constantly talking to foreigners, whether they be in different countries, whether they be in the same country and they've moved to the particular place we're living. But we all have different backgrounds. We all have different age groups. We have different education. We have different accents. And everybody has learned English in a little bit of a different way. So this is basically the world that we're looking at right now. And we're going to come back to this map and talk a little bit more. But another little story, when I was teaching English, and I started teaching English a little over 20 years ago, I moved to Brazil. And one of the companies that I was teaching English at in company merged with a Canadian company. Now, you would think that because my students did speak advanced C1, C2 English, they had been working in business for years, you would think that there would be no problem working with native speakers in Canada. But immediately we had trouble. And the first major problem that came across was a simple one, where the Canadians said, "We'll be in on next Friday. Pick us up at the airport." Now, next Friday, which translates in Portuguese as próxima sexta-feira, is a different day. These are a week apart because of culture. The Brazilians were at the airport on Friday to pick them up, and they weren't there. Fortunately, it wasn't the other way around, where the Canadians arrived early. So this right there pointed out the need for understanding the culture and the meaning behind the languages. Now, another one is talking about culture. Americans, Canadians, and most of the people that I encounter in the world are very, very professional, very standoffish. South America, on the other hand, they have a totally different culture. For example, women tend to be very touchy and think nothing of it. There's no meaning behind it. But this actually can make some countries, the people, very nervous, and it can put across the wrong impression. And this is when I really started getting into the differences between cultures in the world and started studying more. And what I found over the years, there's a lot going on. So if we work at World Englishes, and I'll show you a little video here. This is Pangea and continental drift. If you're familiar with this, that it's believed that everything started as one landmass and then moved around into different places. And I kind of equate this to what's happened with language. Obviously in language, as countries moved apart, as people moved apart, as people moved to different areas, language was also changed. Now, let's go. And here we see World Englishes, and it's English as a spoken language. And you'll see going from green down to red, you'll see that there's different amounts of people that speak within these countries. You'll notice the dark green, you have the United States, you'll see the UK, Australia, New Zealand, going down to a little lighter green, Canada. And these are all countries that use English as a spoken language. Now, one step further, English as an official language. You'll notice that the dark blue, the native countries, that it's an official language. In the lighter blue, it's considered a second official language. And finally, we go to just the native speaking, English speaking as an official language countries, which you see here, which are minimal. Now, there's a lot of information and a lot said over the past few years in ELT that native speakers need to improve, and we need to stop using idioms and jokes and learn how to communicate with people all over the world, because we have this world Englishes. Now, quite frankly, if you look between these native countries, we don't have problems communicating amongst each other, because we know that even though there's differences in the language, for instance, slangs, for instance, accent and pronunciation, even though there's a difference, we know how to communicate from one native speaker to another. Just like in your own language, you know how to communicate with somebody speaking your own language when you don't understand something that was said. So it's not the English that needs to change so much, it's the communication skills. There's different versions of English all over. And this whole idea of world Englishes, I think, is really just a bad excuse. And this is going to be a very unpopular idea, but this is my opinion. And I think it's a bad excuse for poor teaching. And when I mean poor teaching, I'm not talking you here, because we are doing the best that we can do and getting further instruction all the time. We speak better levels of English. I'm talking about throughout the world, and I'll use Brazil as an example. English teachers are only required to have a B1 level. If you look at some of the videos that we see all the time that people are putting on YouTube, where you see teachers trying to teach a class and mispronouncing, using poor grammar, I feel we need to increase the level of teachers throughout the world, and we need to improve them, number one, because the bad habits that they have are being passed on to our learners. Now, I also think poor learning is a problem. You know, we have everywhere. We have the conditions of learning, whether it be a large, oversized classroom with too many students. Students aren't motivated, and they aren't using English, and they don't see the purpose of learning English. So a lot of this onus is on the learner also. Um, Also, selling books. I really feel that a lot of this has been done with the publishers. Remember, we have two major markets for course books throughout the world. One is American English, the other British English. I'm not saying either is better. No argument between the two. But here's what would happen if we only had one standardized English. All of a sudden, the two are going to be fighting against each other. And I think that to sell more books and to sell more course books, this is where this whole concept of world Englishes has come through. And a lack of standardization. You know it's very difficult to communicate with most of the world using the metric system, and Americans still stuck on the old inch, foot, and yard system. I had to make this transition myself, and it's very difficult. I still have to go back, and if somebody asks me what the temperature is here, I'm well accustomed now to Celsius, being in South America and Europe now for way over 20 years. But now I have to do the calculation to bring it back to Fahrenheit. And this shows where a lack of standards causes problems with communication. For instance, we all use the same numbers. Mathematics are the same throughout the world. And this is why we're able to do math from country to country. We have standards for computers. We have standards for telecommunication. We have standards for everything, which allows all the systems worldwide to be able to tie in together. Where we don't have a standard is in English. And this, again, is causing problems in communication. And I see a need to fix this. Now, the need for the change, we need to build some more standards. And yes, we need to cut out the idioms or teach them. Jokes have to come out. But what we really need to do is to stop just teaching English. And we need to start teaching communication skills in English. We need to teach understanding. We need to teach how to ask questions if you don't understand. And we really need to start this now. Now, I'm not talking for everybody. For instance, here we have, if you have a waiter, if you have somebody working at McDonald's, perhaps this is fine. Tourists, it's fine. But the reality that I look at in dealing in business English and dealing with people in the workplace throughout the world is people are using English as a globalized standard for doing business throughout the world. Here, we're looking at the fact that we need to increase the level of accuracy and to really communicate at a much higher level of English than what we have now. Within 10 years, it's estimated that 87% of global business is going to be held in English. And when we have miscommunications, this is going to be a problem. We've seen problems, you've heard stories of plane crashes, of ships crashing together, all because of a lack of a standard or some way of properly communicating in English throughout the world. Now, most learners are studying English for 6, maybe 8 years in school, but they still have not been taught communication skills in that language at this level. Yes, they may be wonderful C1, C2 speakers, but they still have not been taught how to communicate. They're not prepared. They know the words, they know the grammar, they have fluency, but the lack of communication skills is holding them back. They aren't able to achieve a level of L2, being English, equal to their L1. I have the same problem. I had to learn Portuguese when I lived in Brazil. Now I speak pretty well. I can get through any basic day-to-day situation. But to sit down in a boardroom professionally and work with a contract, talk about negotiations, I don't have these skills. I don't have the English. I don't have the ability because it's not taught. So what happens with communication throughout the world is it becomes hit or miss. We end up with major mistakes, mistranslations, misunderstandings, and miscommunications. Now, it's not very important if I'm ordering a hamburger at a restaurant while I'm on vacation, but if I'm talking about medicine, if I'm talking with lawyers, if I'm talking with any kind of business doing any type of negotiation, these misunderstandings and miscommunications can mean your job, can mean billions of dollars, in some cases could mean life or death. Now, let's take a look at what we're teaching. Normally, most teachers right now, including myself, before I get involved in business English, of course, we're working on accent and pronunciation. And I'm not saying that we have to change people's accent, but we do need to work on pronunciation so people all over can understand them. We teach them grammar, we teach them vocabulary, we teach them how to speak faster, be more fluent, and lately we teach them how to work with games. But what is the reality when we start getting into business and into the workplace? We're looking at what is the level of their L1? What is their accuracy? What is the level of their L2? How accurately can they speak? And then we're looking at a difference in culture, differences in context, differences in perspective. Every country has a different culture. Every country has different perspective on the way that they look at life. Now we add in more of the business pressures and we have control. We're looking at who's in control of the situation in a business negotiation, who's got the power, where is the profit, what's the motive behind the communication that we're doing and the need and the use. Then what we have to add into that is how empathetic are the speakers and listeners Two, properly communicating. What's their mood? What's their attitude? What's their communication style? What's their job? And how much pressure is the job putting on the communication that's happening? So when we add this together, there's a lot we need to deal with. Yet we're giving them just this in the standard classroom. And I'm not saying that we're wrong in the standard classroom. Of course, we need to give them this to get started. We need to teach them English, but we need to go further with this for proper communication. Basically, you could equate it, we've taught them how to hear, but have we taught them how to listen? Now, talking about that, let's add some issues that we're looking at, and these can cause conflict. And some of the differences are verbal communication styles. We know some people are strong speakers, some people are shy speakers. We have nonverbal communication with the body language and hands going everywhere. Um, Attitude towards conflict. How do people deal with conflict normally? Approaches to completing tasks. This can be different from different countries. Major difference with my move from South America to Europe. Decision-making styles are different among different cultures, and attitude towards disclosure. For example, Americans tend to be very open, and we'll give a lot of information. We'll tell you how we feel it is. Where you go to some other countries and everything is hidden. They want everything hidden. They don't give up too much of themselves. So there's some of the reading I've done came across this transparency illusion. And as you can read here, it's a belief that we feel, desire, and what we intend to say is crystal clear, even though we haven't done a lot to communicate exactly what we want. Now, think about it. We do this in our own languages. How many times have you said something to somebody and you say, well, that was clear. I said exactly what it is I wanted to say, but they didn't understand at all. So, did we really think about how we were presenting what we were saying, or was it the fault of the listener not properly listening to what we said? In most cases, it's both. But we tend to think what we say should send the message. And we're not always cognizant of what's happening in the listener's mind. This is part of communication that we have to fix. Now, a great book, Thinking Fast and Slow. This is by Daniel Kahneman, and he was a Nobel Prize winner in economics. And what he talks about is the thinking process. And the thinking and decision-making process comes back to our communication skills. People say, well, how does that relate to English? It doesn't relate to English, but it relates to communication. And communication, in our case, being English teachers, is where we have to work on. Now, Daniel Kahneman came up with this idea. There's two systems of people, and there's a system one person, and they process information quickly, intuitively, and automatically. They use shortcuts. They make conclusions about other people based on facial expressions, body language, intentions. And one of the biggest things with system one people is the primacy effect, that the first impression that they have of somebody sticks. Now, how often have we met people and we make a first impression rather quickly based on the look, the way they speak, the hand motion? I'll tell you, somebody being from the North, I've often seen the prejudice of against people from the South, because when Northerners hear a Southern accent, they tend to think that people are not very intelligent. Has nothing to do with it. It's just the local accent. But we make this in System 1 people have this first impression, and that impression sticks. And this makes a difference with decisions and communications. Now, System 2 people, they think consciously, rationally, and deliberately. It takes a lot more effort for them to make decisions and to decide, but they keep an open mind and they're able to update their first impression of a person. And we should all try and be System 2, but unfortunately, we're not. Now, Heidi Grant Halverson said in her book, No One Understands You and What to Do About It, that most people are cognitive misers. They're content to trade off speed for accuracy. In thinking about others, perception usually ends with System 1. It's the easy way out. First impression is the impression that we hold on to. And thinking about it, more and more in English teaching, I hear everybody saying that we have more of a need for fluency, and fluency has become more important than accuracy. Maybe if you're working at McDonald's or you're a tourist, this is true. But if we trade off accuracy when it comes to business, where most people will end up using English in the future, we have a problem. Now, cognitive misers. This means that people are lazy thinkers, and I'd like to equate this to, I call them communication cheapskates. We tend to be lazy speakers, and we tend to be lazy listeners because we think we know what we're hearing, we think we know what we're saying, and we're not worried so much about making sure the other party is understanding exactly what it is we're talking about. And this is all about perception. Now, a case in point, we see two different dishwashing detergents here. And one is a great value. The other one, it's Ultra, Dawn Ultra. Products in the United States and throughout the world, I don't know if you've ever noticed them, these are actually the same product. There, if you look carefully, it's kind of hard to see here in this picture, but the bottles are exactly the same. These are run, and the only thing that changes is the color slightly in the label. I actually used to have 4 different versions. Now, the Ultra here on one side sells for $1.98. The Dawn on the right side sells for $3.74. And the difference is the duck. No, what it is the difference is marketing. Now, if I had a supermodel who was on TV advertising the next product, that would probably cost $7 or $8. But it's exactly the same product. But we go by our perception. And this is what's all behind branding. If you're familiar with Outback Steakhouse, which has places all over the world, I hear it all the time. Oh, it's a wonderful place that came from Australia. It's not. It came from Tampa, Florida. What they did is their branding, they're giving the perception that you're having something new and different from a company from Australia. Now, Ford and Mercury are two of American car companies. And Ford is an affordable car for most people. Mercury usually costs about 30 to 40% more. They're the exact same car. They're built on different assembly lines only to put different parts in certain cars. What's changed is the Ford insignia is changed to Mercury, but they're identical cars. Yet people perceive Mercury as a more expensive brand and pay more money for it. Now, this has to do with foundational heuristics or fundamental heuristics. These are mental shortcuts that we make in our thinking, and this eases our problem with solving and decision making. We're doing the exact same thing in communication. We form biases. These are cognitive biases that come across in our communication skill. For instance, availability is we make judgments about the first thing that comes to mind based on past knowledge. So, for example, if you're used to hearing people say something and somebody starts off and the sentence sounds the same, we've already made up and finished the sentence for that person in our mind based on what we've always heard before. And we haven't really listened to what they've actually said because our brain takes over and has this bias. Representativeness is another one of the biases that we have. And this is with us predicting the probability of the event. So again, we're making a decision and we're deciding on what the person is saying before it's even said based on the probability due to whatever. Could be our culture, could be our background. And then there's the anchor and adjustment. And what this does is most people usually choose the first thing said. Now, try this with any kid. If you go to a kid and you say, which would you prefer, pizza or a hamburger? Usually they're going to pick the first thing that they've heard. And in most cases, they'll pick pizza. It's because we anchor. And when we hear two different things, we usually decide on the first one. So let's talk a little bit about language confusion now. If we look at language, here's some examples that we see dealing with the prefix in. So prefix in is not always negative, and sometimes it just serves as an intensifier. Now, we know that, but does everybody who's listening know that? And how far did they study the language? Here's some problems that I've encountered. In the United States, no means no, except in Polish, where it actually means yes. And eventually in English isn't eventualnie, which means possibly in Polish. Actually means current or valid in Polish. And transparent isn't transparent, but it's actually a poster or a banner. Now, this happens all the time when we have these false friends. Going back to the cognitive biases, the first thing that comes into mind is the word and what it means in our language. our own L1, not an L2. And here's a big one. Effectively, efficiently, and productively. In American English, effectively means you achieve what you want. Efficiently means not wasting time or energy. And productively means a positive result or larger quantity. Yet in Russia, they really don't have this word the same. Effectively is effectively, efficiently is also effectively, and productively is there efficiently. So when we compare what the conversation is, an American is talking about the result, Russian has the result. Efficiently, Americans talking about effort, yet the Russian is still talking about the result. In American English, I'm talking about quantity, but the Russian may be thinking about the effort. And this all goes back to cognitive bias, which comes into play into language. Now, I love this from Noah Chomsky, is how do we know that these are mistakes? Because we don't know what we don't know. So if we didn't know that there was a problem with this word, we would go on and tell the Russians to increase productivity, and they're going to work harder. So this is the problem. What's the intention? There's cheap. What's the intention behind the word? Is it inexpensive? Is it garbage? Or was it just misheard as sheep? What was the intent behind everything? Okay. Now, words have weight, and research shows that 85% of you think I'm brilliant. I hope it's more. But seriously, when you hear the word research, your brain automatically thinks fact. So this is a cognitive bias in communication. And then we take the message behind the meaning. Gentlemen, you've done a great job, but get some help next time. And she doesn't look happy. She thinks, what? She's not capable. But you shouldn't have to do all of this yourself. Oh, so she misunderstood the intention behind what he was saying based on what she's used to hearing before. And this is a lack of communication. Now, a little story about the BESIG. We were made up of a committee made up of people all over the country, all over the world. And you can see we're from different backgrounds. This is our old committee. And we had a situation where I suggested we make up a Google Sheet to share information. And I got a response, to be fair. Now, what does to be fair mean? So I polled everybody on the committee who was around the world. And to be fair, if you say that to an American, that means fight. We're going to have an argument. Yet everybody else on the committee thought it meant actually. So they thought, oh, no big deal, actually. But I was pretty upset because I was ready for a fight. And in actuality, the person who said it to me meant fight. And in actuality, there already is one that exists. But the intention was fight. Yet most of the people from different places around the world didn't catch that intention. So the result is I'm still waiting. And let's look at communicative style. Here's a British invitation in a little email chat. I would like to inquire as to whether or not you should be attending my session on Saturday. Please respond at your earliest convenience so that I may plan accordingly. The response, because the British, Thank you very much for your email. This is to inform you that I will be attending your session on Saturday and that I am indeed looking forward to participating in it. Very polite. So, with that response, the first person, thank you very much for your timely response. I will make note of your attendance and will look forward to your presence with us. Until then. Now, here's the American version. Okay, a lot less words. And this is part of communication culture. And I get emails all the time from people from Europe, from the UK, and they're long, wordy emails that go on and on because they're worried about politeness. 88 words we had just to say we're coming on Saturday, where the Americans did it in 12 words. And now, if we talk about um, millennials and using texting, here's what we're looking at now. Actually, I'm missing something. Oh, yeah. So look at how communication has changed and look at the different style among countries and amongst age groups. Then you have cultural communication norms. This right here is a survey that was sent from Japan, and they were roughly 40 questions. And this was like reading a book. If you received a survey like this, would you bother filling it out? Way too much information because the Japanese like to be precise and have everything spelled out. Yet, most people will look at this. It's hard enough to get them to do a short 2-minute survey, let alone to do this survey, which would have taken about an hour to read through. So, this is a difference in culture. I tend to be very short. And when somebody sends me an email, for instance, Janice sent me one, could you send me your profile picture? Usually, she knows what she asked me for. So I'll send back one, attach the picture, and put, here you go. I don't need a long hello, goodbye. And people complain about that. And they think that I might be rude or not a lot of pleasantry. I get right to the point. So my style is different from someone else's. And this all comes down to high and low context, which we won't go into today, but you need to be aware of it. Every country has different context level. And this means that there's very huge differences in the way they're communicating. And I'm not just talking the language, it's the use of words and it's the communication style. So, this is something for further study. And with meeting culture is a lot different throughout the world. Many times I sit through meetings, and their idea outside of the US is that a discussion equals success. In the US, to Americans, a decision equals success. And maybe this is why we don't like football or soccer, because we want a win. We want an outcome. We don't like tie games. So for an American, a discussion equals wasted time because we haven't come to a conclusion. So I've sat through many a 60-minute meeting to decide on having another meeting, and that drives me crazy. This is why I'm so happy that regular meetings are now 10-minute stand-up meetings.